Welcome to Off the Track, an unofficial F1 in Schools podcast from some current and former competing world finalists. We're going to introduce ourselves and we're going to just discuss a few things like some of the rule changes, competition and technical, and we're going to discuss like how we interpret it and a few of our experiences along the way. To start with, I'm Jesse Stevens. I'm the design engineer for Infinitude. I worked alongside Luke Batches to design the Infinitude World Finals car, which broke the 1 second barrier in the world record.
I'm Ben Galvin, and I'm the graphics designer for Team Ascension, competing in Abu Dhabi in 2019.
I am Peter Russell. I was the graphic designer for Infinitude, and I competed alongside Jesse in the 2016 F1 in Schools World Finals.
And I'm Michael Walker. I was the graphics designer for Precision Racing, who competed in the 2015 World Finals, and a graphics advisor for Infinitude as well.
So today we've got a few talking points. Effectively, we're going to discuss the technical regulation changes, even though they're only a month out from the competition, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just discuss how we interpret them. Kind of interesting points. Like one of the ones that we'll just bring up now is like plagiarism, and then so that's just like we're just going to discuss all the different rule changes that we find ambiguous or we just find interesting, and then it's going to be a fun half an hour, 45-minute podcast. So does Peter want to get us started on the rule classification?
Sure. Well, the formatting of the regulations has changed a little. Each rule has been classified into one of three categories. So we've got general, safety, and performance. So a general regulation is really, what it says. A general regulation, really. It's a regulation that shapes the way the car fundamentally looks and works. This is vital to the style of an F1 in Schools car. The safety rules are mandatory rules that govern the safe running of the car, and the cars must meet these rules to be considered safe to race. And a performance rule is a rule that has a direct impact on the performance of the vehicle, and they typically carry the heaviest penalties. We also have proportional penalties, which discourage teams from breaking technical regulations in order to gain an advantage or more points on track, which I think a lot of teams try to do, and I think Infinitude is guilty of having done that. Would you say so, Jesse?
Yeah.
They violated the safety ones a little bit, didn't they, in one of those races?
I don't think our regulation was a intentional break of the safety regulations. I think what ended up happening was that our regulation was a performance regulation that we would have broken that turned into a safety regulation when we realized that the car would have exploded.
Yeah. And we've also had the removal of critical regulations, which means that any team can now become world champions. And the fastest car and best engineered car awards will still only be available for the best team in the specified area who have not broken any performance regulations.
You can still become the world champion. And I think that's a really good thing because a lot of teams, you might break a rule that, the best in the world shouldn't be breaking any rules. That's the simple thing.
Yeah.
But there are some teams that, through extenuating circumstances, they might be a lot better. But I remember what was the team that they got their pit display lost in the middle of transportation?
Oh.
It was that Mexican team, wasn't there, or something like that?
Yeah, that's horrible.
So if you lose something or something drastic like that happens, you can't eliminate the risk of that happening. And say in the car design, if your wings don't show up and you have to use separate ones or stuff like that, it's important that I think that teams can still win even if they don't have a legal.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but also it's not difficult to ensure that your car is compliant with the rules either. I say that as our car was completely compliant with all the rules, and I believe it was only one of two, so maybe it is hard. But still, having a compliant car is extremely important for the competition. I didn't agree with the critical regulations. I can see where they're coming from, but the proportional penalties and the way that they're shaping the way the penalties work towards teams seems to be a much fairer way than just saying critical regulations can't outlaw you from winning the world finals totally, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Proportional penalties is something that are really there to discourage breaking of rules because it'll get you a performance benefit. Like in Australia, years back, 2013, 14, they made a rule that the wheels must spin, because I believe teams found that it was more efficient to have wheels that didn't spin.
Oh.
Yeah, and
So how would that work? Would the cars just slide along the track?
Basically, I think is how it worked. I was never really clear on it because by the time we got to competition, it was been and gone and not even a consideration.
Sorry, Michael, I could probably explain this because we're currently doing this in dynamics. So effectively, for a material, there's a coefficient of friction. There's two. There's one that's static and there's one that's kinetic, right? Now, especially for the development class ones in Australia, there's a lot of friction in the wheel system, right? So there's a lot of kinetic friction inside the axle and the grommet that causes frictional loss inside the wheel system. Now, that frictional loss would have been greater, right, than the frictional loss from the wheels just sliding across the track. So effectively, there was actually less friction by having the wheels completely locked.
Right, yeah. And so for those who aren't in Australia, the development class wheels are large 32mm plastic wheels, and the bearings are plastic, if they can be considered bearings. And the rod is just a brass rod that connects them through the car. It's a very basic system intended for, lower class competition. And so that's why people would get their wheels to jam up, because of what Jesse explained. And so, yeah, proportional penalties would be a really good way in the world to stop rule breaking like that. So I think that's probably one of the best changes to the rules in terms of fairness anyway. It creates a much leveler playing field.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Michael says there. I think that if you break a rule that's like a loophole, and we'll get to this a bit later on because there's the spirit of the competition rule, but I think if you find a loophole that's that's kind of improves your car speed massively, I don't think you should be penalized for that.
I think having rules that you can find ways around invites for innovation, which ideally is at heart what the competition is all about, is trying to be the most innovative and different team. And I think having rules against this sort of free-flowing thought can impede on what the competition is going to look like.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit our Infinitude car was probably not the fastest car in the world without our innovation for the lures. It's probably a top 10 car, but it's not a number one fastest car in the world. So the kind of thinking behind it is that if you can find something that's so glaringly there for one team, or you work hard to justify your decision, why should you be penalized for that when the rules say that it's allowed?
I think everyone agrees on that. So we should probably move on to the competition regulations. Peter, do you want to?
Yeah. So we've also got some new regulations concerning the fairness of the competition. We've got 3 regulations. We've got C2.15, which is the benefit of the doubt. And teams will be given the benefit of the doubt in lieu of a penalty if a penalty cannot be clearly identified. Also got C2.16, which is spirit of the competition, which basically prevents unsportsmanlike behaviour. We've also got C2.17, which is plagiarism. Now, this is another very interesting rule, which says that teams may be excluded from a particular judging area if plagiarism is detected. It's unclear how judging panels will detect plagiarism. Over the past week or so, I've heard Turnitin may be used at the World Finals. It'd be interesting to see if that also applies retrospectively to previous World Final portfolios, or if it was just going to be like against online sources, or that's going to be quite interesting to see if that rule's enforced, or any of the rules are enforced, to be honest.
I would imagine that they would feed in the previous year's World Finals portfolios into the thing, because they have all of them. We give them all of their folios in digital form as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to get Nationals portfolios as well from ICCs.
I don't think. Sorry to interrupt, Michael. I don't actually think it's a good idea to get national folios in the system, though. Or if it is, because say you're a team that forms from another team, or you get advice from someone. If you've got permission, it's going to come up. As long as your work has permission, it's not plagiarized, right?
I mean,
So
yes, but also it's not your original work, which is I think one of the expectations when you're writing the portfolios. You're writing about what you've done, and so if you've just taken it from someone else, like if you're explaining a theory, then like your friction coefficients and that kind of thing, and how that applies to your car, I don't think it's as big of a deal if you take it from someone you know and you've worked with and you've got them in the collaboration section of your folio. And that would certainly come into the benefit of the doubt part of this. But if it's just something taken from someone else's portfolio, then it's not your own work, and it's not really what the portfolio is about. It's about your team. It's not about explaining these concepts. It's the concepts and how they relate to your team, if that makes sense.
I do agree. Like, the portfolio should be a unique document, and that's obviously one of the most important things, is that teams produce their own documentation. But I think that plagiarizing it, or counting plagiarism through a copyright software, is not going to work very well, because firstly, if I'm a team, right, the first way if I know I've plagiarized a folio, I know how I can get around it easily. I take screenshots of my portfolio, right? Upload images as my pages, right? Turnitin doesn't have text recognition yet.
Really?
Right? No. So
Wow.
you can just submit like pageless PDFs. That's like, if you want to get to a word count, or you want to make it like look that you've not plagiarized something, or you could just take a screen grab, right, of another person's portfolio and make that specific part not text, right? And match it with your style. I mean,
And we are not, sorry to interrupt, Jesse, we are not saying that we approve of these methods, and students should not be using these methods. And if anyone's found to be using these methods, we will definitely see a rule change surrounding it.
Well, and I think that's why the spirit of the competition rule was brought in. If you're trying to skirt around these regulations, that's when that's going to be exercised.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the main thing that portfolio, the whole copyright plagiarism rule is coming into place, is to combat. I know recently, within the last couple of years, there's been a lot of portfolio nabbing and stealing, if you will. I do know of teams that competed last year at the World Finals had their portfolios stolen right off their pit display. Which, I mean, is unfortunate to hear within this competition. And I think that's the main thing that this is going to try and combat against.
Yeah, it's not just portfolios, though. It happens with everything, whether it be websites.
Websites! Wow,
Team.
we had one.
No.
We had
it's
one
just
team.
example,
I'm not
yeah.
going to name the team. They completely ripped off our entire HTML and CSS of the Infinitude website, and they replaced it with all of their own stuff. But it didn't make any sense. Like they had.
It's even better, because wasn't their team images pictures, right? Literally the names of our team members.
Yeah, so it would say Nicole.jpg, but it would have, like a guy as Nicole.jpg. Like, they changed nothing, and even I had comments in the HTML that said, I'll take this out at a later date, and it still had that on their website. So you could clearly see it was our website. They just changed it.
Yeah, and it happens with team identities as well. I'm not going to go too much into this because it's very clear who stole what from who. But like, I've seen it happen with team identities as well, where they've just got the same or similar names, and they've just taken verbatim, pretty much, the team identity that's been created. So yeah, it's certainly a problem within the competition. I think this is a good step towards combating that. Though some of the doubts I have are around the vagueness of the benefit of doubt and spirit of the competition rules, and how strongly they can be applied.
Yeah. And it doesn't say what the penalties will be.
Yeah, it doesn't either.
Well, in the case of the plagiarism rule, it says they'll be excluded from a particular judging area. But if that was to happen, there'd be a major loss of points.
Oh, that's like a 200, 300
Yeah.
loss.
Also,
there, like-
just one question, right? Like with the plagiarism of websites, just hypothetically, right? People like web designers sell their website layouts coded to be like that.
Yep.
Mm.
So I reckon some teams go and actually genuinely buy the code and get it redone, and that's what professional business does, right? Most of the websites in the world are not designed by in-house teams.
No.
They're modified by in-house teams.
Yeah.
So do you get to the stage where a team buys the same template as another team that they didn't know had the website? Then you get to a thing. And does that come to the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah.
I'd say it does. And it comes down to them not having JPEGs named the same as another team on the website.
You'd have to consider it in context. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have the same template, that's one thing. But if you've got the same website and where the
same layout
where
too.
the copywriting is literally just changed. I'm looking at this picture here, and it says, in our description, we've got the two halves of the team from St Bede's College and Brighton Secondary School. But when they've copied off, they said the team was entirely from this school. I mean, it's so blatantly clear that they've copied. I've just lost for words, really.
To be fair, they do have a voicemail which you do not have.
Oh yeah, I do see that. That's interesting.
No. That was wonderful. That is actually wonderful. Is that just disabled on our website?
Voicemail.
Like on the side, the contact us, because that would have come as a template. Is that just like disabled?
I reckon no. They probably put some JavaScript add in to make that work. I don't know what service they're using, but
Right.
interesting.
It is. There's also been a pit display rebuild competition regulation included as well.
Yeah.
This one's
Now
very
this-
interesting.
Looks like a headache. And I speak from experience with pit displays. The Precision Racing pit display was not complete until 6 seconds before the end of the 2-hour rebuild process. The 2-hour build
blimey.
process.
I mean,
Mostly still with my electronics, so that's why. But anyway, what were you saying, Jesse?
Continue on. Sorry, Michael.
So I can see the teams having to rebuild their pit displays as a big hassle and a lot of time because like you've got 2 hours to build it, right? And then at the end of the competition, after the formal dinner, everyone just packs down that pit display however long it takes them. That's at least like 3 hours to 4
Yeah.
hours to
At least.
pull down and rebuild, right? Unless there's going to be a kind of cart system where you can lift it onto a cart and then just wheel it wherever it's going, which
Yeah.
I doubt. I highly doubt.
You'd
that
have to
will
think
be the
F1 in
case.
schools would be, making some considerable, they'd be helping the teams as much as they can.
Yeah.
Well, also, just in our case, right, we had a domestic transfer for our pit display, and it wasn't packed as well as we packed it when we left, because I had to repack it for our transfer. And if you think about that, right, if you're trying to transfer something from one place to another, and I assume it's all going to be in one big truck, you're not going to be expected to do it by hand because that's obviously way too hard, right? But if you're doing it in like a provided service and you have to do it quickly, you could easily damage your pit display, and then there's no point in putting it up at the location.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'd say pit display judging has to be done before a rebuild takes place. If
Oh,
they-
absolutely. I think this would happen, after the event had finished and during like a Grand Prix weekend.
Yeah, I'm imagining that the competition would be wrapping up, and then a rebuild would take place, and we'd have racing and a formal dinner at a separate venue or something like that. I'd imagine.
Isn't
Right.
the
That's what
dinner
they're
on?
looking for.
Isn't the dinner / like the awards night at turn one of the Yas Marina now
Yeah.
or something like?
So recently, all teams who are competing at Abu Dhabi, I recommend checking your emails because we've all been informed that it's on turn one of the Yas Marina circuit, as Jesse said. So that should be a fun venue to stay at.
That's going to be really good.
But I doubt that it would actually be all of the competitors that would be required to rebuild. I imagine they'd pick out the top contenders.
Probably like the best pit display, world champions, those sorts of winners.
I can't imagine.
And so I can't imagine that they make everyone rebuild the pit place.
No.
Yeah.
Well, if they were, I'd reckon they would because I assume it's a Formula One directive, not an F1 in schools directive. Because I assume that now that Formula One's taking a more greater involvement in the competition, that there's probably some funding going into F1 in schools from Formula One, right? I assume there is because it seemed, or not funding, but at least some kind of sponsorship of some description, right? Because they're getting paddock passes, like heaps of paddock passes, grid passes, right? So I assume there's some sponsorship behind it. So I assume that one of the stipulations is they probably want to show off the education to people or business partners or say potential sponsors for the competition. They say we're also investing in secondary school students and the future of STEM, and that creates more partnerships between F1 and brands. I mean, it's a very hypothetical thing, but it could be like another thing they're supporting and fostering kids.
And being able to get teams to rebuild their pit displays in other locations to showcase that is certainly something that would be beneficial, not just for the funding of F1 in schools and for F1 as a whole, but for us as well, because the more funding we can get, the better the competition gets, And so I think I don't think it's going to be an especially big thing. I think this is probably a rule that won't be used until next competition, probably.
They might try with one team, maybe the world champions, but I don't.
It's going to be something they test the waters with. It's something that they want to expand their ability to do things with teams' pit displays for plans they have down the road.
I think it's the same with the fairness regulations as well. Like we're probably not going to see them used to the full extent.
I would imagine that benefit of the doubt will be used at the Abu Dhabi Worlds.
Yeah.
Spirit of competition is probably gonna be used if we have teams that want to push the boundaries.
I mean, that's just like a common sense rule because it's always been the case that the chair of judges could, overrule.
It's a new incarnation of the judges have the final say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which they still do.
Yeah.
But my point is that there's the spirit of the competition, right? I think has a somewhat definition, right? It's somewhat defined in the rules as what they expect from the competitors in the competition, right? But I would argue that from my perspective, or the spirit of the competition is to push the absolute boundaries, right? And for me, I'm going to say it's a benefit of the doubt that I could push the boundaries, and it's within the spirit of the competition to push the boundaries. As long as I could argue that I'm not doing something illegal, right? If I argue that I'm not doing something illegal, that means that I'm not breaking the spirit of because I think the spirit of the competition says like deliberate illegalities and stuff like that. If I feel that I've done the right thing, or I could just say I felt I've done the right thing when I really haven't, right? It's just a glaring oversight or something like that. That you could then argue your case and your point.
I can see how you say the spirit of the competition is to push boundaries and stuff. But I think spirit of the competition applies more in the case of like gumming up your wheels, that kind of thing. In what ways that are devious, extremely devious,
or sabotaging like another team.
Yeah, that is definitely one case where it comes into play a lot.
Because it seems to be a very, heavy-handed rule. It says that, teams may be removed from aspects of the competition. Same for plagiarism. So teams would have to be doing something really, really, against the spirit of the competition or be committing like a major, plagiarizing big time.
Yeah, and obviously this is up to the discretion of the judges, so
Yeah.
it's not going to be unfair in its application most of the time. You know, there's going to be plenty of reason and discussion by the judges before the rules applied. So if you're doing things right, you have nothing to fear, basically.
I guess that's one of the good things about the rules. It's encouraging teams to do the right thing.
Yeah. And I think we have one last thing before we finish off today. Technical regulation changes. Peter, do you want to go through that?
I'm not really a technical person, so I'll leave this to Jesse.
Jesse, then, yeah.
I feel weird being the sole engineer in this chat. At least when there's Ethan here, it's a bit easier to be in discussion. I don't actually think there's too many notable regulation. Actually, there are plenty of things. I'm just remembering them now, but they're not in the run sheet that we've got. If people could quickly copy that down while I'm talking about our first rule.
Hang on, I got it.
So the wingspan on the rear wing has changed to one continuous segment, not two separate segments, which I think is a really interesting rule change. I mean, if you look at an F1 car, it's always one segment wings, and they've been one segment wings for, 30, 40 years. You've never seen a one segment span, not one element, but they've only ever been one element for quite a while. One span segment for a while. I guess that makes it pretty hard for designs, because it used to be you could just put your wing straight into your canister housing, and it would make it a lot easier just to mount it, and it would reduce your frontal area because all you needed was the wing into the canister housing and maybe a mill for your fillet to connect it to there. Now you've got you need probably a dedicated support structure that doesn't break the span. So you can't even have a stint in the middle of it. You probably need something either side or on top, you have to have 50 mils that's uninterrupted. So I guess what it makes is that it's going to look more like an F1 car, but you're increasing your frontal area, which will probably lead to quite a few unique solutions in the first year of the competition, but you'll end up just converging to one design like we did with the previous wings.
And I'm looking at this picture here on page 26 of the regulations, and I'm thinking how eviscerated these wings are going to get by stopping systems. Wings have always been the things to snap off when you're stopping your car. I think these wings are going to be even more susceptible to snapping off now that they are supported like they are. Am I right in saying that, Jesse?
I mean, I think that, yes, I agree with you, Michael, in the sense of the cars are obviously going to be more fragile, because a lot of teams aren't going to want to take the penalty of having two support segments for their wing, right? They're only going to want one. So that's going to mean if it hits the other side that's not supported, there's going to be a large moment on the thing, and it's going to snap if it hits it wrong. So I guess it as much as you're going to see more breakages, I think it's actually a better challenge for the teams, because they then have to design their cars so they can withstand the impacts, or they design a better stopping system.
I do think that deceleration systems, I know that they've been quite common and in place within the past. However, they haven't really been a required necessary element of racing. But I think with the introduction of this regulation, some of the other changes, we will see more teams utilizing their own custom deceleration systems.
Especially with I believe the World Finals changed deceleration materials. They changed to a deceleration system, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the past few years with the brushes.
Yeah. So previously, did they just sit towers at the end of the track?
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yep. All right. Well, recently, I believe this was either implemented last year or year previous when they implemented.
I think they had them at our World Final as well, but they weren't used by any teams.
Precisions as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's essentially just brushes either side.
And it destroys your wheel system if you're wanting to do it, because I think that's one thing that teams don't think about when they're going to the competition. This is my advice as an engineer. A lot of teams don't realize how bad that deceleration system is. Now, it gets your car slower, and that's the objective of the system, right? But it's not slowing your car in a natural way. It's pulling on the side of your car and putting an extreme amount of stress on the side of your car. So I guess the point is that when you're doing that, when you're exerting that kind of force on the side of your car, it's just going to destroy everything when your car's not designed to take the force there. Because you design a car to withstand force on the front surface of the car, so the front wing effectively, not on the wheel system or not on the side pods. And that you end up going to just see a heap of cars destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, for teams from our school, Jesse, we've always had towels or soft materials at the end instead of using the provided deceleration materials, because it provides that better stopping mechanism. And I think that's one of the big key things that keeps our cars from breaking, is that we actually care about the stopping material. And so from what I've seen of my time in F1 in schools, teams really do need to think about that now more than ever. And for the listeners, we've just had Luke join us from Infinitude as well, so we can discuss some technical regulations with him. How are you, Luke?
I'm doing well. It's getting
You
a bit
introduce
warm
yourself.
out though. Huh?
You can introduce yourself, Luke.
Yeah, so I'm Luke. I was originally the innovations engineer for Infinitude, went on to be a support engineer for Aurora, and then was part of the engineering team for Horizon as well.
Luke, you can call yourself a design engineer now.
Okay.
So we're going to move on from the wings now to 2.1.5, the engineering drawings.
Yep. So,
take it away, one of you two.
all right. So,
Hold on, I don't know the rule in front of me. One sec.
I'll try and get my way through this. Let's see. Okay, so the new engineering drawings rule essentially just states that more in-depth detail into what the drawings require. And the way that they've worded this, it sounds like as if you're giving the drawings to someone else and they're going to see if they can replicate it. I don't believe they will actually have judges trying to replicate engineering drawings at the competition. But from the wording, it sounds like from the perspective of more industry level talk compared to the previous wording.
So, from my memory, it's always been the case that you should be able to reconstruct a car from the engineering drawings. Am I correct, Jesse? Luke?
Well, that's the point of engineering drawings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The point of the engineering drawings in the F1 in schools has always been defined as that. There's different types of engineering drawings, but in the competition you should always be providing as much detail as possible. However, I don't actually think in this case that F1 in schools cars should be able to be replicated from engineering drawings, because you're going to need 100 pages of drawings to be able to replicate each finer detail. You'd effectively need to submit each sketch and each surface, which I don't think is probably a good idea.
It's
like
sorry, Luke, continue.
Sorry, like even if you look at a proper engineering drawing for a complex system, like if you were looking at an actual car, they don't do like the whole car in one set of drawings. They do like, this is our engineering drawings for like a wheel nut, and that'd be like a full page type of a thing. Like it's, if you were to actually make a drawing to reconstruct an F1 in schools car, as Jesse was saying, you'd need to have so many pages because the geometry is not that simple. So it'd be, difficult.
I remember my state finals. I submitted a 14-page engineering document, and like, it sounds stupid, but I just had every single part that was in my assembly, and then the judges yelled at me for that. So the judges don't want to be able to replicate your car. The judges just want to know where the regulations and how you define stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, like, is what the judges want to see is they want to see good engineering drawings that are like to a good standard. You have all of the correct like standards and stuff, and that's what will get you your points for the engineering drawings. But when it comes to them actually using it, the things they mostly are looking for is, have you defined your wings so that when they go to measure your actual car, they can just measure it in scrutineering and stuff. And the same for the virtual cargo is, have you defined your virtual cargo? Where does it sit so I can actually scrutineer it? The rest of it is mostly just you want it to follow certain standards and show things, but the judges mostly don't really care because they don't. It's like, well, yes, it's a big competition and it's important that the judges do look at everything and they do try, but at the same time, if you think about it, you have like 3 judges to go through the engineering portfolio, and they're going through like 50 engineering portfolios in 3 days. Like, they're not going to want to flip through like a 100-page book for each team. That'd take way too long.
Well, I think there's 12. There was like 4 teams of 3 that read through all the engineering portfolios at World Finals. But even then, no one's going to. Firstly, they judge it in about 20-30 minutes. They're not reading through every detailed, intricate moment. They effectively are just reading the summaries of everything. And also, the fact is that they're seeing 50 of this, or maybe 20 of the same portfolio effectively, because as much as we can say, yes, the cards change a lot, they're built on a lot of the same principles, and they're built on a lot of what effectively is just the basic concepts of an F1 in schools car. So you're going to the judge is going to read that after the 15th time, wow, we reduced the drag coefficient by a significant number, and they're going to get quite bored of that.
Yeah, but then at the same time, as a team, you may like hear this, then be like, so we should do something completely different and stand out. And then it's like, yes, you do want to stand out, but make sure you're standing out for the right reasons. Like, you don't want to be like, I want to stand out, so I'm going to model my car to look as close like to an eagle as possible. And you make like a perfect eagle, you're going to stand out, but it's not going to be for the right reasons. It's not sound engineering. So it's difficult because, like, yes, they're going to see a lot of the same things, and yes, a lot of the stuff you're doing is going to be similar to other teams. You don't necessarily want to innovate for the sake of innovating is not good. You want to innovate because it makes your car go faster. It's necessary, not just because we can.
Okay.
To some extent, there is some point where innovation is good, but not on your final car when you need it. Like, there was a team at our World Finals where they had this like 50-gram mass, or this 5-gram mass suspended like 10, maybe 5 or 10 centimeters higher than the actual canister housing of their car, and it was like very, very weird to look at. But they didn't really have an engineering justification for it, but it was on their final car. But as a prototype, that would have been a very perfect idea to just have on their pit display or bring into an engineering interview, or even just in their engineering portfolio.
Yeah. On that note, I think we're going to move on to some of the other rules because we've got a lot to go through. Decal thickness. Basically, there's an absolute maximum, excluding any surface finishes, so like your clear coat and that kind of thing, for an absolute maximum of 0.5 millimeters for decal thickness. I don't think this is a super big deal, considering that a lot of people use
Water slides.
Water slide decals. So, what do you think, guys?
I mean,
well, this just comes from.
You go.
This just comes from like a stupid team back in our era that wanted to define their entire car as water slide decals. So effectively, I think it's a good route. It's just getting rid of an ambiguity in a rule. I don't think any team that's using a decal as an actual decal is going to really like get impacted by this rule.
Yeah, it's only when you're trying to exploit like the definitions of a decal, like Jesse was talking about. There was a team that basically their car was 3 different components. One was like the center canister housing, and then the other 2 were like the side pods, the front wing, and held the wheels and stuff. And they were 3 completely different components, and they called the bit that held the wheels a decal to get around the rules. And it led to a lot of arguing with the judges and the team because, like, it's not in the spirit of the competition at the time, but there was no real legal justification. And so they just added in this little max decal thickness, and hey, it solved the problem because a team can't try and just do the grey area of the rules where they just make their entire car out of decals, because that's unrealistic.
Yeah, and I think that's where the spirit of the competition regulations we discussed earlier definitely come into it as well for these kind of situations. They've also specified in 2.5.1 the diameter of the CO2 cartridge chamber measured at any point through its minimum depth, being a minimum of 18 millimeters and a maximum of 18.5. So that's a safety penalty. So 10 points off if you break that one. I don't think there's much we need to say about that, to be honest.
You don't want
Don't
to pull an
break it.
Infinitude.
Yeah, basically. Like, that's one of the rules that you just don't break. It's real easy. Just make
Well,
sure
I guess our general advice is do not touch the safety regulation or safety penalties. Well, my advice would be don't touch the performance regulations at all, unless you are. Well, actually, I'd say don't, because it's out of the spirit of the competition to deliberately break rules now. So I'd just suggest do not
Don't
deliberately break
rules.
rules.
Yeah, basically. I mean, yeah, there's a point where, like, because with Infinitude we had this problem in which it was like we took a decent point penalty, but it did make our car ridiculously faster.
I think Luke, you missed the point. We have already discussed this in like 5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, because you're coming in the middle of the episode, we've already
sorry.
discussed this at length.
Well, okay.
We've also got regulations specifying the location of the tetherline guides. So each car must only have 2 firmly secured tetherline guides, one on or up to 50 millimeters in front of the front axle center line, and one on or up to 50 millimeters behind the rear axle center line of the car. The track tetherline must pass only through both tetherline guides during racing. So
See,
this seems to have some pretty big implications for car design from what I can see, because a lot of the cars I've rendered have tetherline guides that are far further forward and far further back than this.
It's going to. I don't get this rule because you theoretically you want your tetherline guides as further forward and further backward on your car as possible, and it's actually probably a safety thing. I reckon that,
It's a safety
in my
penalty.
opinion, no, but I'm saying it's a safety thing that the closer you move them together, the more chance there is of something bad happening to a car.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the point is like, if the tether guide gets yanked out of somewhere stupid, like, that's not good, right? Like, the front wing is a very intricate piece of thing, and if it's taking the load of like a crashing force at the end of the track, because that's effectively what the stopping is, and then a pulling down force of a tether line guide. But I still think that it's more unsafe to have it in the middle of the car where the car can like yank or grab on something and it just has to do something slightly wrong and it moves badly.
yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like, I think is what they may be trying to do is trying to get teams to incorporate the actual tether support structure into their wheel support structure. But at the same time, I don't see what was wrong with the minimum distance being 120 mils, because then because from a safety point of view, as you said, you want them as far apart as possible anyways, as long as they're not smashing into the end of the track, which, from my knowledge, I don't remember many teams having their tether guides being ripped off their car, or any real failures from the tether guides at our World Finals, or any World Finals that I've like watched or anything like that. So I don't understand where this
They do the 200 gram test though, still, don't they? Where your tetherline guide has to. So if your tetherline guide's strong enough, it's strong enough. I don't think that putting a restriction on where you should put your tether guide is going to help. Like, there needs to be a minimum distance between them because it's unsafe after a certain point.
Well, then you may as well just put one like long one and then say it's 2. Like, if there was no minimum distance, that's what I'm saying.
Right, so I think we've covered that one to a certain extent. So, technical regulation 8.5, visibility in top and bottom views. So the visibility of all wheels must not be physically obscured by any component of the car in the car's top or bottom elevation views Car body or any other components must not exist within the dimensions illustrated below. And for those listening, we'll have all links to the technical regulations, competition regulations in the description of the podcast. These dimensions must exist from the inside edge of each wheel's track contact width to the extreme width of the car assembly and a height from track surface of 65 millimeters. This is measured parallel to the vertical reference plane and track surface. It also relates to Rule T10.8, which is clear airflow. So basically, I think they're trying to just prevent you from... It's like the 15 millimeter rule between the car wheel and the side pod, and they're trying to prevent you from putting body extremely close to the car. If some of you, the listeners, are familiar with the alternate or rapid fire racing cars,
I do not think anyone that is watching
they're a bit old. They're a bit old.
Should we maybe link that at a certain point to show where we're talking about?
We'll link to that in the description of the podcast. But they had very close, or even the Cold Fusion car from 2012. The side pods got very close to the wheels, and I think almost overlapped with them. And this rule basically expands the no contact area for the wheels and the body. Like the 15 millimeter air gap between side pod and wheels.
Yeah, the way I see it is it's basically trying to emphasize that it's F1 in schools and not like LMP1 in schools. Like they want it to be an open wheel car, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm more surprised that if they were going down that route, why didn't they just ban the rear pod? Like there's nothing behind a rear tire in a Formula One car. So why is there something behind the rear tire of a Formula One in school?
Look at the construction of the car that they've supplied. Their wing is coming off that rear pod. So if they get rid of that, have fun getting creative.
Yeah.
It makes things more difficult to define whether it's a side pod or whether it's wing support.
And also aesthetically, I feel like the rear pod does bring like a certain like completion to the car. It does look quite nice.
Yeah,
just having it out the back.
Oh, I'm not arguing it, but I'm saying if they're wanting to go down the route of
looking more like a Formula One car,
looking like an F1 car, I'm never going to see these cars look like an F1 car until I see nothing behind the rear.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and it's not. I do share that view where like if they are really wanting to go looking like an F1 car, the easiest way to do it is to make it so that you say the rear wheel must be fully visible from the back of the car. Like basically just like the front wheel visibility thing except for the entire rear wheel from the back. Like I don't understand why they haven't done that. But
maybe they just don't want to go that far this soon, saving that up for later.
Please no.
So we also have technical regulation 8.12, which is
8.12. You mean?
Yeah, 8.12. Sorry, wheelbase. So the wheelbase of the vehicle is the distance between the center line of the front and rear wheels as viewed in the side view, an absolute minimum of 100 millimeters. So this seems to just be replicating the same kind of thing as the Tether line guide, because the Tether line guides are now based off the wheel center line. You're going to need to restrict how close those can get as well.
Well, I think another part of it could be that from like an F1 in schools point of view, if your wheels are really close together, then your car can rock more, and that can damage the track. Because like if your car like pitches forward or backward or something like that, and then one of your car components scrapes along the track, that's going to leave a mark on their track, and the tracks aren't cheap. So I think part of it is that as well.
Yeah.
But honestly, to be fair, if a track's destroying, right, from the simple use of a 50-gram Formula One car that doesn't have much force behind it, the track's the problem. Like the tracks get damaged quite easily, and this is one thing that would be something that I complain about the competition. Like these tracks are robust, like they're heavy as hell, because I've had to set them up many times, but they're not strong for some reason.
Mm.
Yeah, but I feel like in order to scratch it, you don't really need much force. You just need one material to be harder than another. And especially if a team is using like this in conjunction with the tether line guides having to be inside of the wheels, basically, if also what you need is a material that's slightly softer than like what our tether guides were made out of, which was a what were they? They were titanium torzite?
No, silicon nitride.
Silicon nitride. Like
No, sorry, silicon carbide.
yeah. All is what they need is the track to be slightly softer than that, and they're not going to make an entire track out of silicon carbide. That's unrealistic. Like it's while yes, the track is slightly weaker, I do think that if they were to make it out of a material that could genuinely withstand an F1 in schools car scraping along it, then the track would be very expensive and very heavy.
But I think the current track's made out of like a kind of like, I would say like fiberboard, coated fiberboard or something like that. It's not,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a wood of some description. I'm sure they could find some kind of polymer that would be strong enough.
Right. Well, leaving the track aside for another day, we have more regulations to get through before the podcast gets too long. 10.3, we have wing and wing support structure locations, which is a performance penalty, so one you probably don't want to touch. So it's split into two sections. We got the front and the rear. So the whole front wing and support structure and nose cone must be in front of the center line of the front wheel and no more than 30 millimeters above the track when viewed in the side elevation. Okay. And the rear one is the whole rear wing, and any support structure must be behind the center line of the rear wheel when viewed in the side elevation. Okay. So, Jesse, what do you think?
I mean, it's once again, it's one of the rules trying to, stop the cars looking too ugly or not like F1 and schools cars, and try and stop the kind of solution that Horizon used last year for having their wing above their wheels. But I don't really like it. It's a rule that I don't like, but you can't really do much about it. I think we'll see more F1 looking designs, but it won't be necessarily better.
Do you think we're moving away from faster and faster F1 in schools cars, or do you think there's still room to get down below a second?
I think there's still a potential to get below a second, but it's like the real does. At the moment. They changed the rules to make the cars slower or harder to make faster.
Yeah,
and they still get faster. It's the fact of cars will get faster over time. It's just they will get slower. The development of them getting faster and faster, so the rate that they get faster will be slower.
Yeah, like we saw, with the 15 millimeter rule, cars did slow down because they're not as they're aerodynamically stable with that gap between the wheels and the side pod that you can see on like Cold Fusion's car and that kind of thing. And so you think it's probably going to be more like that it's one step backwards and two step forward. But it's going to be more like one step backwards and 1.5 step forwards in terms of the timeline for how we push the boundaries of speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a nice challenge. I think the cars need to be slowed down, but because you're not gonna, if you get to say the faster and faster points, you're going to get convergence of cars, and you're also going to get convergence of data. And when the cars are slower, there's more variance because there's more time for the car to be slower. So, and because the timing gates only go to three significant figures or 3 decimal places, effectively the variance is very small between the cars. So it's going to be, if the car's steep and being just under a second, you're going to have maybe one decimal place could split up 2 teams.
Yeah. And
3 decimal places could not be used to split up 2 teams. And I think they're trying to stop that. And when you've got a car that's slower, there's more time and more chance that the cars will be split up.
Yeah. Okay. There's also a new rule 10.4, visibility of wings. The visibility of the front and rear wings must not be physically obstructed by any other component when viewed in the front view. So I think we've already discussed this rule earlier. So we're just going to skip over this.
10.5.
We've also talked about the span rules as well, which are the other two. So if you're wondering, listeners, what the new rules are, they have a lovely little tacky blue star next to them saying new. Okay, and obviously we've been through all of them today. Performance penalty regulations are highlighted in yellow, and it's all explained in the document for you. Okay. Do you guys have anything else to add?
No, I think that sums up pretty well.
Haven't heard much from Ben in the last 30 minutes.
I know, I'm a graphics designer. Engineering ain't my forte.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking forward to the World Finals live streams. Obviously, Ben will be there.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch the live streams.
We might do a podcast or a simulcast of when we're maybe commenting on the World Finals or something like while it's going on.
Oh,
or
that'd be good.
during the award
That would
ceremony
be
or
at
during
least
the knockouts.
at least knockouts or the formal dinner, the award ceremony.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I'll be
We'll
there for
work it
live
out.
coverage.
Live reporter on the ground.
Correspondent. Now we go to our correspondent Ben, who's on the floor.
Can you radio and like walkie-talkie like me and Peter did back in?
Oh, that was brilliant. Oh, those are the days.
Okay. I think we've pretty much said everything we want to say, and we don't want this to. It's gone an hour, and we said this would only be a half an hour podcast. So, we got a bit distracted at the end, especially when Luke joined. But I think we got through everything. I hope you had a good time listening to us, and if we've got any feedback, just leave it to us. I don't know where this is getting uploaded, so just comment wherever it's uploaded of some feedback or just in general what you'd want to see from the podcast in the future. I'm sure
Follow us on Instagram at Off the Track Podcast.
Do we have an Instagram?
We've got an Instagram?
We've got an Instagram.
Wait.
Trust Peter to get us.
This is news to all of us. Hang on.
Yeah, there we go.
Well,
follow
you
us.
got to get your social media marketing in, guys.
Follow us on Instagram.
It's a key
Join the
component.
F1 in Schools World community or the F1 in Schools subreddit if you haven't.
All the Discord.
We also have a Discord,
as
yeah.
well. Yep.
You can also upload your F1 Schools battle stations to r/F1 Schools battle stations.
F1 IS battle station.
Oh, sorry.
I think I currently have the best battle station, but I haven't uploaded it yet.
Oh, what are you doing?
That doesn't count.
I'm going to do it now just to prove it.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the end of the year, I'll give someone gold for their best battle station.
Oh.
So if anyone wants a Reddit
Wait,
gold
is-
on one of their posts,
What is Reddit Gold anymore, though? Isn't it Reddit Premium? Didn't they change that?
It's the same thing, isn't it?
Oh,
If you get Reddit Gold, you get Reddit
award.
Premium.
You can give awards.
oh,
That's-
okay. I don't like what they did. I liked Reddit Gold. It was a good system. Now we're truly going off the track here.
Bum, bum, bum. That's a plug for our
Platinum.
podcast. So yeah. Sorry.
Thanks for listening.
Have we even said our podcast name during the podcast?
Yeah, when we go off the track.
Okay. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll let Peter close us out because he's got the best voice.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to listen to us on Instagram. Follow us on Instagram. Hope to see you soon at the next episode of Off the Track. Bye.